Technology isn't just a part of our everyday lives anymore. It's become a frontier for global powers, with India right in the mix. So why not join the conversation? Take the Technopolitik Survey, created by researchers at the Takshashila Institution. It's just 10 simple questions, but your answers could help shape India's strategy in navigating the fast-changing world of high-tech geopolitics. Your voice matters, so let's make it heard. The link is in the bio.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. In this episode, I have Nandan Kamath, who's the co-founder of Sports and Society Accelerators, as well as the managing trustee and co-founder of the Go Sports Foundation. His book, Boundary Lab, has been received well in sports fraternity and beyond. And his invite to the recent Bangalore Lit Fest was testimony of the uniqueness of the book and its take on the various dimensions of India's sports ecosystem. The book has also won the Sports Book of the Year award in the Ekamram Sports Literary Festival, ESLF, at the India Habitat Center. And it's a highly recommended read for those who haven't picked it up as of yet. Nandan Kamath has also worked with the government on many policies and codes. And he's of course played cricket long ago for Karnataka at the junior national level before turning his attention to a career in law. He's also a graduate of the National Law School of India, the University of Oxford, and the Harvard Law School. Nandan Kamath and I had also co-created an inaugural open Takshashila course called Building a Sporting Nation in August of last year. And we see that the nationwide interest and potential of collectively moving the needle for Indian sport is there. And so with that, I welcome Nandan, and always a pleasure conversing with you, Nandan.
No, thank you so much, and Happy New Year, Malathi, and to all of your listeners. I think that one of the highlights of 2024 was doing the course with you, Building a Sporting Nation. Look forward to building that sporting nation with you and all of the various people involved with Indian sport.
Yeah, thank you, Nandan. Thank you very much. And in this episode, where Nandan and I will just look at what 2025 has in store for the sports in India. And so we're going to be just touching upon some of the things that we feel at a high level because of the paucity of time. But one needs to just keep in mind that it's a very dynamic place that we are in right now, right? At the beginning of 2025, there's lots to look forward to as well. So we'll be just looking at things like emerging markets and opportunities that are there in 2025 with respect to the Indian sports ecosystem, what government policy decisions will be critical and what to expect from communities, essentially society, where we all are part of, and how we can be catalysts of change for sports. So before we look ahead, a quick recap of some of the notable 2024 highlights for Indian sport. And the Olympic year is always a special year, right? And 2024 was no different. The Summer Paris Olympics with Manu Baka leading the way for the shooting contingent. Of course, Harmanpreet and Srijus reviving India's hockey tryst with the Olympics. And Neeraj Chopra and others from the wrestling and archery fraternity made a mark. So the 6 fourth place finishes is the silver lining, knowing that our athletes are inching the way to the podium finishes, which we all are aware is not just about skill, but mental resilience and, of course, luck. So India essentially finished 71st with 6 medals in the kitty for the Olympics. But the Paralympics was quite different. We saw India achieving a very successful performance at Paris 2024. They secured more than a total of 29 medals, 7 gold, 9 silver and 13 bronze. And this achievement surpassed the 19 medal haul from Tokyo 2020. T20 World Cup was another highlight. Of course, India was brought down to earth with a bang with New Zealand clinically demonstrating how sport can be a great leveler. And that happened a little later in 2024. And finally, I think chess, which would be, it was a watershed year for India, for sure. We won the chess Olympiad in Budapest with the Indian contingent winning both the team goals in the men's and women's category. And of course, Gugesh recently defeating the world champion in a thriller of a series. Not only becoming the youngest champion and second Indian after Vishy, but coming from the stables of Vishy's academy, it also shows how one can successfully give back to the sport. So this is some of the highlights I thought of for 2024. Nandan, anything you would like to add?
No, I think that's a lovely summary of the sporting highlights. There are also many different other things that have happened. I think the most significant one of all was Olympic bid becoming very real. There's a news came out that the government had made a formal submission that they were going to make a bid, not yet nominating a city,
Right.
but looking at hosting the 2036 Olympics and Paralympics. And I think that was a very significant event in the policy and development landscape for sport. This formal intent, until a few months ago, it was sort of not really formally expressed. But this is a big one that is going to actually dominate at least the next few years of Indian sport.
Right, yeah. And I think that's great. And of course, we had the drafts of both the national sports policy as well as the governance bill that was put out for public deliberation last year. So I think those were some other things on the policy side. Of course, this year we will talk about that a bit for 2025, but those are some things for 2024. So looking ahead now, and it's an exciting year for sure, right, Nandan? Because we have some major events coming up, and these include some unique ones where India is hosting the World Para Athletes Championship for the first time. So now para athletics has kind of gained that traction, and that's something that's very encouraging to see. And there's also the Women's Cricket World Cup. Women's cricket also has gained traction over the past 2 or 3 years. So that's also a positive sign. Now, would there be other things if you can look at? Let's look at maybe from the policy angle, and then within the recent draft national sports policy having been put out for the public deliberation last year. And would you see any encouraging signs there that you would like to share?
Yeah, I think this year we should see both the sports policy and hopefully a sports law become realities, hopefully in the first half of the year. To me, these all are part of the broader umbrella of becoming a legitimate Olympic contender to host the Olympics. Essentially putting our house in order before we invite guests in, right? So, and I think these are very early pillars. It's the foundation. I think one of our weakest points has been the state of sports governance, but also sort of clarity and policy direction. And I think the sports policy put together with the bill are a sort of a true two-pronged sort of attempt. The bill follows in the policy's footsteps, where one of the attempts of the sports policy is also to, in some sense, bring a governance layer to this whole broader policy objective of bringing multiple stakeholders together. And I think one of the things we can look at is really playing as a team, playing as Team India. And that requires different people to play different roles. And when one looks at the policy pyramid, you have what we talked about multiple times in our course, the Samaj, Sarkar and Bazaar. And I think everyone has a role, but it needs, in some sense, direction and clarity of who plays what role and how that supports the broader ecosystem growth. And I think the policy has the first elements of that, to bring clarity of what we're hoping and seeking to achieve together. And in some sense, giving direction to each stakeholder's efforts and initiatives. And in some sense, building a coherent sort of ecosystem where everyone is pulling in the same direction. We haven't had that for a while. We have multiple stakeholders. It could be the union government, it could be the state governments, federations, non-profits, civil society, business. And in many cases, there's a significant overlap. And in some cases, there's even cross-purposing of work. I think we're a country with limited resources. To use those well needs strategic clarity, but also directionality. And I think I see those green shoots coming through in the policy and the bill.
Yeah, no, wonderfully said, Nandan. The Indian sports ecosystem is at an inflection point, right now, because as you mentioned, there are a lot of stakeholders, and all these stakeholders, working together. There are many moving parts, but then we're heading in that direction, so which is a good sign. Earlier, maybe the government was playing a larger role, but now we are seeing how the markets as well as society is stepping in and realizing that, hey, we have a role to play as well. We just can't just wait for the government to dish things out for us. So we need to also keep in mind that India is a young nation with over 65% below 35 years. And so those green shoots of even a promising economy is presenting itself. And the importance of using sports for national building can't come at a more opportune time, right? And as you mentioned, that good governance is the bedrock on which both the grassroots and elite as well as social development will thrive. And making sports a way of life and integrating it as part of our culture and holistically developing it across multiple sectors. And this is something that even in the national sports policy draft, they have kind of covered a spectrum of areas, because they realize the importance that sports can bring, even in development, the social development as well. So, I know initially the education sector alongside our healthcare sector, and these two should work hand in hand. Also, because interesting, data point that I have is by 1947, a fit India, India which is with the physical activities at the forefront, and that our Indians are able to also be more productive. It will boost India's GDP by 15 trillion INR annually. So, and with this, 4.5 trillion INR annually will be only from the sports sector. So these are the predictions that we have. So additional to this, which is why I mentioned the healthcare sector, is that we can also prevent non-communicable diseases. We can prevent more than 110 million cases of such, and save over 30 trillion INR in healthcare costs. So, we see that this has a cascading effect. It has a second order effect. And so it's important that sports starts now playing a larger part. It cannot be the primary sector for sure, because the government does have many other more important things to handle. But then sports is now being seen as a catalyst, right, to bring about that change.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think this notion of using sport for nation building is very much in the policy draft, right? And I think you talk about 2047, 100 years in. We want to be sort of a developed nation. We talk about Viksit Bharat, and I think that's the direction we want. But overall, I think it's not that difficult to say that I want to be a sporting nation. But one of the missing elements so far has been trust. And I think we underestimate the role of trust, and how low trust ecosystems are very expensive to maintain. So they don't use resources very well. People are so constantly sort of at cross purposes. And I think the opportunity here, and what the government is trying to do, is to infuse more trust within the ecosystem, and for athletes to trust the people who are governing sport, for governors to trust the government. In some sense, for corporate India to become a serious player, it requires an element of trust. At the end of the day, there are shareholders involved and others, and you need to take a lot of people along. So in many ways, I would say the foundation of this future is going to be based on transitioning the sports ecosystem from low trust to, I don't know if we'll get to high trust in a while, but certainly to one where there's ability to rely on someone else's role and belief that it is going to do well. So if the government sends out the right signals that governance is going to be under the radar, sports bodies follow that sort of the mandates, recognizing that's in your best interest, you can see corporate India also come to the table. There's no shortage of either interest or money in Indian sport, but there is certainly a trust deficit. So I think this is the big one for us to focus on as an ecosystem, to learn to play together, and good teams learn to trust each other, even if you not necessarily have the same interests at all points of time.
Absolutely. And that's coming from a true sports person, right? So I absolutely agree, Nandan. So even the National Code for Good Governance, the draft that was put out last year, right, did try to explicitly spell out certain things, and just to kind of, so how do you think the good governance code is, in terms of, is it forward looking, or is it just old wine in new bottles?
So the good governance code was drafted in 2017. What came last year was the National Sports Governance Bill, which is expected to be introduced in the budget session coming up of Parliament. And there, the attempt is to actually build a regulatory institutional framework, in some sense, to give the nudge to sports federations. And if you look at the last 8-10 years, lots of our sports federations have been embroiled in huge amounts of litigation. So for very good reasons. I mean, there's enough reason to suggest that there's been huge entrenchment. That they don't necessarily reflect democracy in the way we generally consider that term. But at the same time, that has brought Indian sport to a reasonably grinding halt, which means that, again, the government has had to double down. We have the Target Olympic Podium Scheme, where the government in many ways is funding athletes directly. Keeping the national sports federations in the loop, but in some sense making them almost irrelevant in the larger decision-making scheme of Olympic preparation. Lots of the efforts are now government direct to athlete reward schemes, recognition. And in many ways, this last 8 or 10 years, while national sports federations could have played a growth role, they've been hampered from doing so most often due to their own challenges, but also caught up in a legal maze where you're neither going forward, neither going back. There's been this vacuum, and I think the bill attempts to move forward, recognizing all the limitations, but building some structures on which principles can be hung. Is not an easy effort, because regulating sports bodies is caught up also in the principle of autonomy of the global movement. You have to be very careful with what mandates you make and what regulations you put in with respect to sports bodies, which also have international affiliations. So it's a little bit of a careful dance. I'm not sure that the bill will be perfectly replicated in the act. There's lots of things that will have to be negotiated, including relations with international bodies. But I do expect that this is going to be one of the important steps in building this trust-based economy, where we believe that national sports federations, which play these significant monopoly roles in our governance, actually play their role. So I think the greatest challenge is if a monopolist doesn't do anything. And an inactive monopolist is probably the most challenging one. And I think we need to move to a place where those rights of governance are have a balanced accountability at the same time.
Right. So true. And the collateral damage of all of this, right, would be the athletes and the support system. So, if you get these things in order in terms of the governance and other things, it will kind of help move things around more smoothly. Right? So keeping that in mind, just segueing into the bazaar, the markets, because even the policies and the foundation that we lay, the government puts out, will kind of impact in a positive or negative way. But we surely hope will encourage the markets to kind of put more money in, right? And that's important too, because there is interest for sure, like you mentioned, but that needs to translate into things on the ground as well. And as we mentioned earlier too, by 1947, if you're looking at boosting India's GDP, and we're expecting more than 4.5 trillion, and that's a significant amount solely from the sports sector. And I'm talking about INR here, but 4.5 trillion INR is a significant amount in terms of coming from the sports sector, at least as a first step. And so there's a huge untapped market out there. And over the last couple of years, we have seen an upward trend in not just in consumer interest, but also in market penetration. Right? So we know that where there's a demand, there will automatically be a supply. So we just need to let free markets kind of take over. So what would you say, Nandan, are some of the sports industry trends that we can expect in 2025 from an innovation perspective, right? From something that's I'm thinking out of the box, because India being not just a tech hub, we also have a startup industry, especially in certain towns, which is kind of really pushing and changing the status quo. So if you can maybe share some industry trends we can expect in 2025.
Yeah, I think the industry is leaning to two things, and I would look at them very proactively. First is energizing fan engagement. So really looking at the fan and in some sense building out credible ways for fans to engage with content, with events, with athletes, and in different ways. And the second is building a participatory environment. So closing the loop. Fan engagement is not just passive spectatorship. Fan engagement is actually giving the people who you engage an opportunity to play and to become part of that ecosystem as well. So combining fan engagement with participative sport, I think, is where we need to go, both as, in some sense, bazaar, which is the business of sport, also Samaj, which is in some sense plug many of the gaps of access where people aren't being able to interact as fans with sport, but also to bridge gaps of access to play. And I think those are the two big trends. Again, what you're doing is competing for share of wallet, which is people have limited spending capacity. So if you're getting an allocation to sport and fitness and physical activity, perhaps it's coming out of something else. Or else you're in some sense attracting people who are upwardly mobile. And the second is share of time, which we're seeing is a huge challenge, particularly in urban settings. So in some sense, can the sports business actually vie for share of wallet as well as share of time both from a fan engagement perspective, but also from a participatory sport perspective. And I think that is the direction we will see more and more things going. We've seen the big merger of Geo and Star. Expect much more investment in viewership and more technology coming into how we engage with sports content. I think generative AI is going to play a large role, not just on the broadcast side, but
Yes, sure.
the exciting bits are also on the coaching and knowledge side. The ability for it to personalize, I think it's going to be a while away, but the potential in our country where there are very significant knowledge gaps, capacity gaps, and the ability to personalize content to a particular context. It could overcome some of the challenges we see of access, of safety, of personalization to someone's particular circumstances. It could be someone who could be a person with disability. It could be a woman who cannot leave the home. There might be various different circumstances, and technology's ability to come in and play in your zone, I think, is an exciting potential. I don't know if it's 2025, but we're seeing those early trends moving in that direction.
Yes, absolutely. I think the green shoots are there. In fact, when you mentioned it in passing, but I think these are very important even for our listeners to know, because things like safety, things like inclusivity, for para athletes, for example, or other genders, I think that's important because we know that these, let's say for women's sport, right, safety is a major issue for those, especially in the rural areas or even those within cities, maybe commuting from point A to point B to attend events or practice. To have accessibility to infrastructure. So these are challenges that one might not really have thought of, right? But these are real things, and many research and reports have highlighted this as one of the main challenges. So, in addition to what Nandan said, I would like to add that things like I think now smart stadiums are becoming a thing that are coming in. This is there in other countries, but I'm seeing in India too. This will also improve the overall facilities that a stadium will have. Because we also know that fans, when they visit a stadium, it could be something as the basic necessities as good functional toilets to availability of snacks and food, which was not the case earlier, right? And so I think this we see that improvement, especially cricket stadiums, because with IPL and WPL having come in recently, we are seeing that a change for the better. Of course, other things I would like to also add is esports, which and for those of our listeners who don't know, India is going to expected to host its first international esports tournament in 2025. And this is something, again, the Indian gaming and esports sector is expected to surpass $1 billion by 2025. So, there's lots of traction in that area as well. We can also think of, innovation with respect to how formats in different sports. Like we had the T20 recently, but then T10 has come in last year in 2024, and that's been kind of making waves as well. And then talking about just cricket. Likewise, in other sports as well, there's been a lot of innovation and creativity that has come in. We've had new sports being introduced. While cricket remains the most popular, we have other sports like paddle, which is a racket sport, is a combination of tennis and squash, which is gaining popularity in India. There's pickleball, another sport that's becoming popular. Again, this is more in the urban because people are more conscious about physical activity and they want to kind of try something more, try different, something that's creative. And bouldering is another one, which is more of climbing and problem solving skills, right? So these sports have been introduced in India recently, and it's kind of taken the market by storm. Urban cities, I mean, the urban areas, the tier one, the metros, the tier ones do have infrastructure for this. And the markets seem to be kind of playing their part in encouraging it further. Would there be anything else you'd like to add, Nandan, for what the markets or the industry is doing in terms of spreading awareness about sport and encouraging it?
Yeah, I think a big trend, and we'll see it from a government as well as business perspective, is looking to the sports, fitness, and physical activity industries for skilling and jobs. So if you look at more mature markets, very often 2 to 3% of the workforce is involved in sport and fitness related jobs. It could be coaches, could be fitness instructors, swimming coaches, and other things like that. We are still in the low, I think 0.3% or even less of people who are associated with this. So I think what the buoyancy that sport can give to jobs, skilling, and livelihoods is a massive opportunity for us to think about. And we're not talking just about the athletes. Yes, we want careers in sport as for sports people, to be sustainable so that our best talent remains in sport, but also the support staff, the infrastructure. And it's not just about high performance sport. It's the people who support our everyday, right, of getting fitter, getting more active. I think there is a lot of headroom. And if we're able to kickstart, like I said, this participatory movement, a fan-led movement where you're inspired by watching high performance sport and all of the wonderful events that we host and are on TV, you can kickstart this economy as well, which is generating demand for all of these services. It's not just about taking millions of people and putting them in sports jobs. It's actually invigorating an economy which is demand-led growth rather than, in some sense, putting supply into the market. So I'm quite excited about what that potential can be, particularly if all of the state governments start looking at this, looking at active skilling, but also kickstarting the little economies by building local sports events, building a culture where even as a society, we build a club culture, get our young to play more. And I think the clubs and schools and educational institutions can play a much more active role in invigorating the grassroots economy, not just about, in some sense, access to sport, but there are many different ways in which we can build meaningful ways to engage with sport and build these mini economies, which, when aggregated together, become the economy of sport.
Yes, no, absolutely, Nandan. In fact, that's a nice way to segue into the most interesting of the three pillars, right? The Samaj. And I think this is where society plays a huge role. We love to watch sports on TV. This could be, international events and other things. But then we need to realize that we need to also be out there and participate, right? And that even if you look at the sports pyramid, the lower tier of the sports pyramid is where you will get the maximum. Most of the populace will be part of that with respect to just having fun while playing. It could be non-organized sports. We don't need to essentially have infrastructure for this. In the past, we would have, in cities especially, we would have seen in Bangalore, where we come from, we would have seen on the streets people playing cricket or in open plots, they're engaging in badminton and other things. But unfortunately, with the real estate boom, there's no safe streets to play on. There's an interesting book, Get Kids to Play, that Vijay Krishnamurthy and Saumil Majmudar have put together, and that has some very nice case studies and how one could, utilize the spaces and kind of encourage a society, and this could be parents, educators, students, children, to kind of get out there and play. Right? We're not looking at infrastructure which is going to be expensive. We're just wanting kids to get physically active, and I think that's a very important role, because as we consistently, are playing at the higher level, and India is making a mark at the international scene as well in certain sports. We also need to keep in mind that we are the most, populous nation in the world, right? So we also need to focus on being a fitter and healthier country as well, and that's where the sports culture comes into play. Creates not just a better environment for everyone, but it'll also help ensure that the healthcare costs are kept low. We know that 50% of the population, that's what the Lancet Global Health Report says, that staggering 50% is physically inactive, right? That there's insufficient physical activity in India. 50% of us are in that bracket. So I think that's a scary number, and this will only grow, over the coming years. And though we know that winning medals is what we all, when we read the papers, right, we feel good that India is winning medals, but we need to remember that that'll come naturally. Right? Ironically, though, the urban areas and the cities which have the infrastructure is not where the athletes who are winning these medals come from. The athletes who are winning those medals are coming from the hinterlands, is from the rural, and they're actually performing really well at the international level despite the kind of system we've had in place. So though many of us do play for leisure, like in the urban areas, ensuring that we kind of are part of that sports culture, right? Like maybe reviving indigenous sports as well. That's one thought I had. Maybe 2025 would be a year for that. And National Sports Policy Draft 2 kind of has spelled that out, saying that they would like to encourage that, because that brings out people, onto the field, or, as part of a larger cultural event. Like in Mysore, we have the Dasara Habba, and during that time, we also have a complete sports event that's running alongside the other cultural events. So I think just people coming out there having fun would be something that will be great to see in 2025. And that, as society, is something that we all could contribute towards. And there are other traditional sporting events, right? Or rather, sports or games that have, some of them have kind of entered the mainstream, like chess and archery. These were all traditional sports. But there are other sports like kabaddi. There is Valankamikali, which is a traditional boat race in Kerala. It's synonymous with the Onam festival. We have the Kalaripatya, that's more of the martial art. That's again coming from Kerala. The Malakkam, which is more practiced in medieval Maharashtra, and it was part of the erstwhile Andhra Pradesh at one point in time, which is again used to be a sport originally, for supporting practice for wrestlers, right? So this is a sport that again in Kalo India we're getting to see. So many of these traditional sports are being revived and for the better. Right? So what's your take, Nandan, of how society can, in creative and innovative ways, right, get people to just be physically active and enjoy what they do?
Yeah, and I think it's very important, like what you said, there's no one definition of sport. There might be globally relevant events, but we can localize to our own context. And I think we all start play with making up our own games. And there's no reason those shouldn't continue to build things that are interesting, relevant, localized. Like they say, right, the greatest chefs say that cook with ingredients that are closest to home. And maybe we can also start playing at the community level with things that are accessible and easy, and just sort of drop the barriers, right? Not everyone needs golf clubs, tennis rackets, and other things to become an athlete.
Yes.
So in some sense, lower the barriers, build a sustainable ecosystem which is close at hand. And I think the second thing I'd like to say is we constantly talk about sports culture. Sports culture is what all of us make of it. It is not something we receive. We are equally creators of sports culture. And I think as a society, we can take those forward steps so easily, right? It's just about getting one other kid to play, attitudes to how you respond when kids are playing around you, and just recognizing that play, even more fundamental than sport, is such a large part of human development. So whether you believe in the economy of sport, that India should win medals or host the Olympics or not, I don't think any of us can disagree in the desire for each of us to develop as human beings, and young people to go through that developmental process. And such a critical element is enabling people to play and to continue remaining active through life. So if all of us can find little ways to sort of make sure that our own lives are active, we're making little contributions. But if we can add and help one other person or a group of other people to also to continue to play, be active, and build communities around sport, I think that builds something special that all of us can enjoy together.
Right. And I think even in your book, Boundary Lab, Nandan, you've actually spelled it out very nicely, right? How society can play a part. So I encourage those who have not read the book to pick it up. It gives an interesting perspective of the different, the spectrum essentially of the Indian sports ecosystem, and where we can play a part in each one of those. Right? A couple of other things that I thought of, which would be interesting, and as society, right, that we could do more of, is volunteering at events. I think most of the time in India, the volunteering is kind of looked down upon. It's like, oh, you're doing something for free. But actually, in the past as well, when you look at the generations before us, right, the community kind of spirit was always there. It's just that once we moved into larger cities and the urban sort of lifestyle where everyone's so busy and caught up with their day-to-day, that volunteering then becomes, oh, if there's nothing in it for me, I don't want to be part of it, right? But you don't realize that there's significant intangible benefits that one has, and this is again for children watching the parents kind of volunteering for events, being the whole family volunteering maybe for sports event, right? And being part of that atmosphere. You're not really playing, but you're supporting, right? And supporting these events that not just attract media and brands, but supporting your local community events. It could be at your school, at the club, the district level, going there and watching those sports. It's not just those on the big screen, but when you think of the what you see, maybe kids just playing in an open area, the free play, and where there's no infrastructure required, just watching kids play, and that kind of encourages them when they know that there are people who are interested, cheering them on. These kind of the spark sort of that's instilled, right, in a child, will kind of help them love sport for what it is. And sport, as we know, is a life skill, right? Many things that come with it, from the resilience and playing as a team, overcoming challenges, a lot of other benefits that one has. And I think it also removes the stress from a otherwise quite hectic academic sort of ritual that we have and that kids go through, especially once they hit their teens, right? So I think this is one a very important thing that we're doing less of, which I would encourage our listeners as well. Just go and encourage your local sports. Don't necessarily have to be watching stuff on TV, but go out there, play, be in the thick of the action, both maybe as a participant, but more so as a spectator, right? I think that's important. We encourage.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said. So particularly young people, students and senior citizens, I think volunteerism should really be encouraged. What I wouldn't like to see necessarily is sports professionals expected to volunteer. I think we've also overdone the notion of you're working in sports, you don't need to get paid. So I think balancing these two, making sure that young people and senior citizens perhaps get opportunities to volunteer and really using that community spirit, but also making sure that we're building a strong professional class who are fairly paid in Indian sport is equally critical.
Yeah, I think that also encourages sports as a career, right, Nandan? Because like you mentioned, right, if there's nothing in it for them, when you're taking sports up as a career, or even want to think about sports as a career, right, you're going to obviously look at the monetary side of things. And we know that, like even coaching for that matter, we have good coaches who have kind of come up despite the system, but then the monetary benefits that they get might not be adequate, which is why we see other fallouts, right? And so I think it's important that people are paid adequately, and and their time and effort spent is acknowledged. And this again is where the markets could kick in, and then ensure that they get their due. Another point that I just wanted to mention, and this again from a society, is where we can break those social norms, right? And it's important for us, is we have to also be gender neutral when it comes to encouraging our kids to play. Encourage the girls to play as well. Let them participate. Let them have fun from a young age, right? So that once the boys and girls are playing together, there's no comparison, because we know that each one will come with their own strengths, right? But the stereotyping and letting those biases actually propagate by being silent to traditional practices is something that will impact genders also in the long term. So I think this is more the educational, the grassroots, where we kind of encourage everyone to play and let them have fun while playing, and not make it too competitive, because that's where the seeds of deterrence is actually planted, right?
Yeah.
So these are some of the things. Would you like to add anything else, Nandan?
No, I think that's a lovely summary. I think we're done with the first quarter of the century. Now on to the second quarter, and I think we need to make the most of it as a sporting nation.
Absolutely. So I think we touched upon at a very high level here. There are many other areas and opportunities and of what we can expect in 2025. If you have any others that you would like to add, please do add in the comments when this podcast goes out. But we encourage everyone to actually just be physically active, right? Go out there, have fun and play. And I think that will make a big difference in kind of promoting that culture of wellness as well, as we sort of transcend socio-economic boundaries for the long run. Anything, Nandan, that you'd like to say? Any closing thoughts as we look ahead?
No, thank you, and have a sporty New Year.
Yeah, thanks, Nandan. Great, like I said, great having a conversation with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.